Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, joined once more by Tate and Sam for another entry in the David Fincher Retrospective. And this week we are reviewing Fight Club, which of course released in 1999, starring Brad Pitt and Ed Norton. I almost did a spoiler event. Of course, we're going to do spoilers for this because it's been out 20 plus years. But before we get into anything, how are we all doing tonight?
Yeah, doing good. Glad that it's not as hot as last week. It has cooled down a fair bit. But yeah, ready to discuss this film that may be one of the most discussed films of all time, as we've been chatting about beforehand.
Yeah, pretty much same here. Definitely glad that we're not in the midst of a September heat wave, because what was that? But yeah, very glad to be talking about this film. And yes, I think last time I talked about a film on here was maybe the Spielberg series, George. So it's been a little
Titanic.
while, I think. Oh, Titanic, of course, yes. I was trying to think of when the last time, because Titanic, and then did Hook and War of the Worlds for Spielberg, yeah. So yeah, but it has been a while since then. That was what, March? Was it February?
February, March time, yeah. It's a great plug, though. So if anyone wants to check out our James Cameron and Steven Spielberg retrospectives, they can. It's great to get you back on. And as always with this, we want to hear from everybody at home. And this is the one, maybe after 7, I think most people might be looking forward to. So as always, do comment below with your thoughts on Fight Club, whether you saw this back when it came out. I'd be very curious to know if anyone did see it back in 99, because I think its reaction was very different to how it is now. Cool. I wouldn't say it's a cult film, but certainly I think time's been a massive ally to this film. And alongside that, as always, if you like this video, if you like the series, if you like David Fincher, maybe do consider hitting the subscribe button, because there are plenty more reviews of his to come. We are building up to The Killer's release on Netflix, which is the 10th of November. And we've got a lot of other films to do between now and then. And if you want to get us on social media, you can do so at linktree.com/cinemasavvy, where you can find our account links to Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Letterboxd, and the rest. But as always, Sam, it's the first time I've got you on for the Fincher retrospective. We're going to put you on the spot. Mm-hmm. Can you remember? Sorry, I'm laughing because I think I know the answer. Can you remember the first Fincher film you saw, or maybe like early memories with the film of his? Maybe you didn't know who he was, or.
It was definitely Panic Room. Like, I definitely remember seeing it on TV, seeing bits of it, and it was one of those. I feel like I would have been at a house party or something where it just would have, the telly would have been on. That would have been on TV. And I remember just seeing just how dark it was, and seeing Jodie Foster. She was the only person that I knew as an actor in that film. And I was like, okay, this looks a bit weird. And I remember catching it again years later, and I watched a bit more of it properly. So that was kind of my first experience, but I never saw the whole thing. And I think I've only seen that once all the way through. And then, so that was the first experience with Fincher, but I wasn't really sure who he was until I kind of, read into him a bit more through college, and then learned about all the other films that I'd done. So
lovely. And it is the 3rd or 4th week in a row we're going for we studied Fincher, which is a really weird trend that's carried on. But we were sort of chatting before. We think, and maybe it's a good question for people at home. If you did study film or anything like that, or media, did you have to watch Fight Club? Because I feel like Fight Club is one of the central texts that everyone does, and we'll get into our memories sort of with this film as well very briefly. But Tate, do you want to do the IMDb plot synopsis for us?
Yes, I do. And this one's quite a short one, actually. An insomniac office worker and a devil-may-care soap maker form an underground fight club that evolves into much more. That's the film.
Wow, not giving anything away.
No, not at all. I mean, they use the word Fight Club in there as well. That's the title. But yeah, that kind of describes it, I guess. It doesn't give away too many details. Doesn't mention the love interest in the film. Doesn't really mention kind of, even any of the things from the start of the film. Kind of completely disregards them. Just kind of puts out the key points. He's an insomniac. He works in an office. He's going to team up with a soap maker who causes chaos. They're going to form a fight club, and it's going to get bigger. That's pretty much the film.
Yeah, it's one of those where, like, the title of the film, it's not misleading at all, but it's one of the titles like it's like paint on the tin, isn't it? Like Fight Club. You people know the rules. People have never seen Fight Club, probably the first two rules of Fight Club. They've seen the photos of Brad Pitt fighting people. They haven't seen Snatch. Mm-hmm. It's pretty iconic within its own rights, and yeah, the film obviously does go off into some low-key insanity, and kind of in line of that, if we each want to talk about our memories of film, I'll jump in first on this one, and kind of the same as I've said the last few weeks. We studied this at college. This was the main film of, I think, the very first module we did in film studies. So through that module, that's why we did Fincher. That's why we looked at Seven. We looked at The Game. We looked at Fight Club. We did do Panic Room. We did Zodiac instead. And actually, the more I think about that, it's peculiar because we've done the 95 film, the 97 film, the 99 film. You'd assume it was the 2002 film we'd do after, but we did the 07 one. So that makes Panic Room interesting next week. But this is a film I've seen a fair few times. But I haven't watched this film, I think, since I left college. If I have, probably on TV or with a friend or something, but I was trying to think of the last time I saw this film. I love the soundtrack, and I've had the score on playlists before, a couple of songs, but I cannot remember the last time I saw it. So I was quite excited to go back to it for this, and I think certainly the last time I watched it, I'd have been younger, a student, had been studying, different mindset with things. I hadn't had an office job. I've not had insomnia, thankfully. But this is one of them where I think, not that there's real life elements, there's no fight clubs. I don't come on here bruises in the face and stuff, but it's certainly perspective-wise is very different watching it today to then, and is almost got a different outcome and approach for me on how I saw this film, which is kind of interesting to talk about too.
Yeah. My memories of this film, this is only the second time I've seen this film. I saw this film post-college, so not quite in college, and I didn't really study film in college at all, so I didn't do kind of what everyone else has been doing, which is the entire subject on Fincher. And it definitely wasn't the first Fincher film that I watched kind of from there. I never really connected with this film. I've never worked an office job. I've never had many of the problems that they have in the film they address, and I guess we'll talk about it throughout the entire thing. And yeah, never really connected with the characters, never wanted to start an underground kind of fighting ring. I guess the only thing I can connect with the film is that I have been bored before, and intrusive thoughts do set in. You do want to kind of do, I'm bored, I want to do something, and it's kind of just escalated from there, not into full-on violence and, trying to take down the stock market, but, it's something that you can at least latch onto with the film. But I've never studied this film. I've never really thought about this film too much. This is actually the first time that I've gone into this film and gone, oh, I actually really need to pay attention this time because I'm going to be, talking about it and analyzing it. And I picked up on more things than I definitely did the first time around watching it. So it'd be really interesting to have that discussion and stuff like that. But I've never connected with this film. I've never gone back to it and gone, yeah, I really want to watch Fight Club. It's been one of those films which I saw once and went, that's a good film. Maybe I'll watch it again at some point, and now's the time,
Yeah, I have kind of a similar background to George. It's weird how similar. We talked about this, prior to doing this this video, and it's strange how much. And I think it's maybe because we are kind of similar ages, and maybe just around that certain time period, like certain things were kind of trending or whatever. And Fincher was one of those things that, I remember very, in second year of college. This was definitely a section. This was a module that you needed to do. We'll watch clips from some of his films, but we're going to watch Fight Club all the way through, and then we're going to analyze the themes, and then we're going to have different papers, bits of coursework on the different themes within it. So there was quite a lot of kind of just intense watching the same scene over and over again. And it kind of makes you kind of hate it a little bit, whilst also appreciating it. But I do remember seeing the poster for this film years and years before, because I think the poster is just so iconic with how pink it is. And so I remember going to, I think it was a store called MVC, and it had all the posters up, and that was one of them. And I remember seeing it there. But I had no idea what the film was about, although I'm I don't know if the ending was spoiled. I can't remember, but I don't remember being shocked. So maybe it was just common knowledge by that point. But yeah, so I mean, a lot of studying, a lot of writing about it, and I've not seen it again for over 10 years. So it was really nice to kind of come back to it at the same time. Also get that bit of fear. Like I've written a few pages on it, and it's only because I'm so used to writing with this film in particular, writing so much. And it's nice to kind of catch up as well, because there is a lot of kind of interesting topics brought up and things that are kind of maybe you wouldn't see the first time round. There's things that as a 28-year-old I look at completely differently than when I did when I was 17 watching this. And having worked, in an office, that kind of it makes you kind of have a different perspective on that. And, if you are I've got my own flat right now, so it's like having to buy stuff for that makes me think differently and makes me think about the money aspect. So yeah, it's different, and definitely a well-made film, and I think I would rate it quite highly. But it's not an easy film for me to watch. And similar to kind of what Tayte said, it's not one that you could just put in very easily. I think there's some great scenes that I could happily watch whenever, but as a whole package, it is a little bit heavy. But luckily, it's also quite funny. So I think there are times where you can actually just laugh with the film and kind of relax a bit. And I'm glad that those elements are in there, because otherwise it would be a much more difficult watch.
And very quickly, for anyone who wants to watch it, currently in the UK, it's on Disney Plus.
Mm-hmm.
So it is available.
Sorry, I always find it funny when you see like Fight Club attached to Disney.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was on there. And I was like,
strange.
Yes.
Do you want to watch Encanto for the billionth time, or do you want to watch Fight Club instead, kids?
It's interesting. And kind of even with all that stuff, everything sort of. We'll talk the cast shortly and whatnot. We'll go into the production behind the scenes, but obviously we're all similar ages. When this came out as 99, it's still the whole Y2K, and there's vibes of it in the film. I just wanted to talk about it very briefly, that the setting, and before it, and I would kind of like imagine if this film was done today. Not that some people love saying imagine this was done today, and it's for them to defend like ridiculous like stuff from the past that obviously wouldn't happen. But the logic is more like a 2023 version of Fight Club. Not that I want this to happen either, but like a 2023 version of Fight Club would be so interesting, because so much has happened in the 20 plus years since this film's come out, and there's so many like reflective messages that are still in here, but a more modern society take on it. I actually think would be very curious. Please don't make it though. No. They'd probably announce a film and it ends up being a really cheap series for Disney Plus, and it'll probably be starring. Well, I can't say Jared Leto. He's already been in one, hasn't he? So. Thankfully, we're saved from that horrible, horrible decision.
He would be Meatloaf's character. He would be Meatloaf's character in that version.
Yeah, he would.
Oh God, I could have made a terrible joke. He can't do Full Method for that, but he'd try and find a way, wouldn't he? But let's talk the behind the scenes. So I've never read the novel, but it is based off the novel by Chuck. I can never pronounce his surname. Palahniuk, I'm going to call him. And he's done graphic novels. I believe there was a sequel for Fight Club as a comic a couple of years ago.
Two sequel comics.
Do you think anybody read them? Is this like Michael Mann's Heat 2, which no one's going to read about until they make the film?
I think they flesh out the universe a bit more. And I think, as far as I'm aware, because I've seen a few videos on this, so I was like, okay, I need to get a full scope on this. I want to say one's a more kind of a pre-sequel, it kind of does before and after, and the other one's a pure sequel.
So it's like Godfather Part 2 and 3.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
If someone's read it, please comment their thoughts. But yeah, I know it was a graphic novel for sure when they did the switcher-ups. Because I remember it being a massive ordeal, because you know the typical clickbaits when it's like, Fight Club 2 is happening, and you have to click the article to find it. It's a book, not a film. I don't think we'll ever get a film. I couldn't imagine anyone involved wanting to come back in the sense of standalone. But the book came out in 96. Fox ended up paying $10,000 for the rights for it. They got a copy of the book before it released. Very much that. I don't think it happens as much today, but you always read about these classic films and the book was always being shopped around before it was ever published. That happened to something in the last couple of years. For the life of me, I cannot remember what it is.
When the Corridors, where the Corridors sing was already being shaped up to being a film before the book even released.
Maybe that. And the one I really like is Kingsman. For those unfamiliar, that Matthew Vaughn came up with the idea for Kingsman, sat in the bar with Mark Miller, at a pub, and they were basically both moaning about spy films, how they're not the same as they were when they're younger. Basically, they're on Bond Twitter in a pub. And between them, they decided, okay, let's do the story together. And then they wrote the story together. Mark Miller went off, did the comic first. And then Matthew Vaughn at the same time went off to do pre-production on the film. So it tells the same story done differently. That's quite unique. And now there's 3 of them, and one's called The King's Man. And there's been nothing since, for whatever reason.
There is meant to be a 3rd Kingsman film coming out at some point, but who knows when that's going to be. At some point.
Taron's been around the block now. He's moved on, but yeah, hopefully they get him back if they do. But they'll find a way to bring back every other dead character, won't they? Sorry. We're not talking Kingsman. We are talking Fight Club. The more interesting about this behind the scenes is after they bought the book rights, Fox was shipping around for a director. Now, here's a couple of names. And you've got to think contextually, 1996, 1997 time. You've got Peter Jackson, pre-Lord of the Rings, who was working on The Frighteners, which is why he didn't do this. Another shout out to the Peter Jackson retrospective.
I want to point out he should have done this film over Frighteners.
Frighteners, the one with oh god, I forgot. It's the one that cost him. Is it the one that cost him his Bond film? Where Barbara Broccoli watched the Frighteners was like, "You definitely can't do Bond." Whichever one that was. So it didn't work out for Peter Jackson. For Fight Club, clearly it worked out also because he made Lord of the Rings. So that speaks for itself. Bryan Singer just didn't bother reading the book. Dodged a bullet there. We won't be talking about that in a retrospective. Danny Boyle was considered it, didn't happen. Don't really have reasons as to why Danny Boyle didn't do it. I can't imagine a Danny Boyle Fight Club. Ewan McGregor would probably be the narrator, which would be great. But aside from that really obvious one, I'm not too sure. And then David O. Russell turned it down because he just didn't understand Fight Club, which I think is, again, another dodge bullet of directors that, shouldn't really be spoken about too well. But, it's Fox at the end of the day. And Fox made this little film he spoke about recently called Alien 3, starring this rookie director, David Fincher, who hated it so much he said he will never make a film again in his life. And 2 films later, he is brought on to do Fight Club. And the background to this is before Fox had bought the rights, this is obviously 1996 before the books come out, David Fincher himself tried to buy the book rights. And I think that's more common than we think for directors to buy rights themselves for films. That does happen. But he was obviously unsuccessful in doing that. And he originally wasn't going to take it because of what happened with Alien. He was very hesitant to come back. But it did work out. And I guess that sort of politely explains as to how and why he did do one Fox film afterwards. I know now he does a lot of Netflix stuff, and then we know he gets that full creative freedom. But just quickly, Tate, for you, what are your thoughts on him working with him? Because it's not like 20 years have passed. It's 7. Well, it's probably 5 years. If this is 96, 97 time, this is like 5 years after Aliens come out.
We're still not too far removed from him saying, like you said, I'm never going to direct a film again. The fact that he's going back to the same company that he kind of made those comments about, and even to this day, he still shuns Alien 3, whether it's the original cut or the assembly cut, he still doesn't accept that film. It's really interesting that he would go back, and I'm kind of surprised. And I guess because he tried to purchase the rights to the story, to the book, it makes you just think, wow, he really saw something in that book. He really saw something that he could film. And I'm assuming he just cut himself a deal just so he was able to make the film he wanted to. And I'm sure there would have been some creative freedoms placed in there. I don't think it was a studio kind of... It doesn't feel like a film that the studio had too many hands in. What it does feel like is a director who's, built up a little bit of a reputation based off, I guess, 7, and at that point the game has also come out, and they've done reasonably well from those. So you assume that the studio's gone, we want you to make the film you want to make, and he's gone, okay, I'll accept that and I'll work for you. That's kind of my take on it.
Sam?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's because I remember when I was talking about Alien and Aliens with yourself, George, and kind of because I hadn't seen any of the Alien films before last year, so I'm relatively new to kind of that world. And you know, I think you watch Alien 3 and I think you see that there's just something missing. And I think after hearing about all the behind the scenes, you know, drama and stuff, I think you can understand why it's maybe not what the original vision was. I think for 5 years it's ballsy. I think it's real ballsy to really put kind of your neck out when you've had such a bad experience. And you know, I just agree with Tayte really that he must have really kind of loved this idea, loved the idea of bringing it to screen, and I think it shows in the final product that it does. There's so many kind of like sections of this film that are so unique, and so you wouldn't have thought if another director had done it, they wouldn't have done that. They wouldn't have chosen to do this. Would they have chosen to have a narration? Would they have chosen to have those on-screen graphics pop up? Would they have picked those very unique designs for that? Then no. So I think you can feel that the love was put into it, and I think clearly he just wanted to, you know, really do the book justice and just make a great film. So no, I totally, you know, I'm happy that he did it. And I'm glad that, you know, despite his bad experience, he ended up creating some great films and did continue on to make some really successful films.
Yeah, it's really interesting as well. I mean, I think when it's studio politics, so I don't want to bring up Norton again. We're just rounding out all the directors and retrospectives on, but in terms of like us modern day, we don't really have stories of like directors not falling out of studios, but sort of going back to them. And sort of pre-Oppenheimer, do you remember all the Nolan talk where it's like Warner Brothers are desperate to repair their relationship with Christopher Nolan, blah, blah, blah. And you sort of sat there thinking, I can't remember. I mean, I guess because he's Zack Snyder, but I can't remember something as a director who was like shunned by a studio who was so public in doing so. All I could think of is Snyder. I don't really want to count Suicide Squad, but
could you count James Gunn? I mean, they pretty much fired him and then had to bring him back. So
yeah, but I think.
So I think it was also like the dramas with some of the Star Wars directors as well, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Like with Rogue One,
Colin Trevorrow. Yeah. I mean, Gareth Edwards. Disney owned 20th Century. The creator is going to be directed by them, released by them, and it's really interesting. I mean, and then again, we're just not going to hear about a lot of that in modern day. There might be tons of stories like it that we're just not too sure about. But I do find it interesting that it's such a public fallout, and then it's brought back. And I do think it was for no other reason than this. And it would be like if there was, I guess, if a studio's got the rights to something and there is a director who really wants it, at what point do they sit down and say, okay, you know, Fox clearly went for other people and none of those decisions worked. There's an interested party and it ultimately has to work for both sides. And I'm just trying to visualize how different each of those fight clubs would be by different directors. And it's kind of like Harry Potter. Harry Potter is almost the book adaptation, like the most obvious piece of evidence in literature into film is the Harry Potter films, because you have sort of three key directors. You've got the Christopher Columbus ones, where it's not bright and colourful, but you know it's very, it's pretty perfect. And then it's like Alfonso Cuarón, a bit darker, teenage years, great, love it. Then they find eventually work it out with oh god, I forgot the name director, not David Heyman, the other David. I always get them mixed up. Anyway, the one that basically did everything from the fifth film onwards. And that just shows, even within a similar franchise, how different creativity can be and like the outcome is. And again, Danny Boyle's Fight Club would be so different to Fincher's. And I think because Fincher's is so perfect, again, not that I know the source material, but I cannot imagine with the cast that are in this, how the film's shot, how it's stylized, how its legacy's gone on, I can't imagine any other director doing a take on this film that could be anywhere near as good. David Yates, the director, thank you for that, Sam, who's just had his first like non-Harry Potter film out since The Legend of Tarzan, and apparently it's dreadful. It's on Apple. It's got Emily Blunt and Emily Blunt and somebody else in a really awkward film. Sorry to plug that. That's why we've not been doing new reviews. I'm not watching anything. But aside from the director side of it, let's talk the direction, because Seven is my favorite David Fincher film. I also think Seven is David Fincher's, not David Fincher. Yeah, David Fincher. Sorry, my head is all over the place tonight. I've just mentioned all the Davids of Harry Potter, and now my brain's suddenly thinking of the wrong franchise. I still think Seven is his best film. It's still my favorite film. But there's something about not rewatching Fight Club today, and again, we're 4 films into the series now, so this might change every other week. He is one of the best directors of the last 20, 30 years, without a shadow of a doubt. And I think Fight Club stands there as arguably his most popular film in modern, not modern day like social media, but Fight Club and Seven, and they're probably the big two. Social Network people talk about Gone Girl as well quite a lot, but in respect to like popularity and reputation, I think those two sort of triumph the others. But it's really interesting where we sort of mentioned it on the Seven review take that because we know he's like a perfectionist as a director, his approach to shooting, his set, how he wants the cast to be performing, how many takes will make them do. It's so hard to talk about him developing as a director, whereas really it ends up being his films become more mature than anything else, if that makes sense. Like the maturity levels of his film change rather than the context of it. And I think this is right up there.
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, it's famous. It's like I've seen people who, talk about this film that I just wouldn't know talk about films. So it has ended up being clearly his most popular film out of all of them. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. It's tough to say. But as far as, kind of people quoting things and stuff like that, this is definitely his most quotable outside of What's in the Box. Best way of putting it, in the same sense. And yet you watch through the film and, the things that people quote off and the things that, have become part of culture. I guess you could talk about kind of how social media has changed over the years and how now this film's popular because of the whole Sigma grind set thing and stuff like that. And that's all the wrong reasons and everything like that. But this film has stayed popular. I was watching it the other day and my dad kind of walked in midway through and kind of turned around and said, "Oh, fantastic film." I remember seeing that kind of when it was on like cassette tape and stuff like the early 2000s and everything like that, and VHS. So he's been able to maintain his popularity throughout the years, and been able to stay relevant. I guess that is down to the story, but it's also down to how, Fincher's able to craft the world around it. He's able to make this film that is dark and brooding look dark and brooding and have all of these different topics thrown in, like ultra violence and everything like that, and make you feel every single punch hit, make you feel kind of every single character decision, and make you feel like an insomniac and insane watching it. And to be able to put yourself in kind of the shoes of the characters in the film and understand their motives and understand where they're coming from, even if you don't relate to them, that's just fantastic directing.
Yeah, I have to agree on that. And I think there's something about Fincher's films that kind of really intrigued me with the fact that the characters in it always feel kind of at least as fully realized as they can be. And I felt that with Fight Club when I first watched it with Panic Room. I felt that with Alien 3, even though there was like a lot of characters and you didn't see many of them very often, I got a good sense of who everyone was in relation to the film and what they were kind of there for. So I think he's really good at doing those. And maybe it's because, in a lot of his films, that at least the ones that I've seen, like there's usually a large cast of characters, but then there's always the focus on those main characters and making sure that they are the ones that are driving this film forward. So as much as he has a lot of, kind of there's different styles and he, there's some key things that he does as a filmographer, he's able to just bring that together, and I love that. And I think with this film in particular, he is able to again bring these actors right to the forefront and give them, as much as they need. I think everyone in this main cast does a fantastic job. But then also the entire world just feels so kind of energized despite how dark it is. And, I think that if anyone's going to say kind of a visual running theme, it's the darkness within his films. But in spite of that, there's so much that pops. And I think to me, that's so interesting because there's a lot of dark films that don't do anything for me. in general, I don't particularly like darker films. Those that just I like colors and I like to have things that are very easy to find. But then there's also some great things like something as simple as an advert in this film, which shines bright in the dark and is something that the characters comment on. Yeah, so I mean, it doesn't surprise me that this film is popular. It's one of the ones where, again, when I was like 17. Most people, if they weren't in film studies or whatever, they like people like, oh, you're doing Fight Club. Yeah, I saw that, like a year or two ago, and I loved it. It was back then. It was very popular. I don't really know anyone personally these days who has said that they've watched it, but I feel like there's a general vibe that Fight Club is the one that stands out. But a lot of Fincher's films do. A lot of his films are recognized all the time, and I think ever since Fight Club, he's not really had a massive flop in terms of this was a terrible film, to me anyway.
Could we make it Benjamin Button?
I know that has some fans. I know it has some fans.
But it was very successful, wasn't it, Benjamin Button? Like,
it was very successful, yeah.
And obviously, also another Brad Pitt, David Fincher film too. One of the only actors he's brought back from multiple films, which is always intriguing. But you are right. The people he's bringing on board. And it's the same for all of his films that I think some of the best auteurs are the ones that rotate their casts. That you'll talk about, these incredible relationships between actors, directors, Cillian Murphy, Christopher Nolan, the most recent one. But this is the first time Cillian's been the leading man in a Nolan film. And really, obviously he's in this film, but it's like Dark Knight Rises was a good cameo. Dark Knight was a glorified cameo, wasn't it? One scene in each. And it's one of those where Fincher and Pitt, this team just to get each other. And I think Brad Pitt in that mid to late 90s period, we spoke on the Seven review about how Seven's like not revitalized his career, but was able to take it in a different direction. Fight Club is very much that, like, you've done Seven Monkeys, you've done Seven, you've done 12 Monkeys, you've been doing a load of the other ones, and now here's another one where people are going to go absolutely wild and ballistic for, because all the insane Brad Pitt stands always go to Fight Club. Everyone knows the photo where he's topless, he's got the cigarette in his mouth, and he's got the fist ready to fight. It's one of those where it's just an iconic image. And even Ed Norton, who I think this might have been one of the first films of his I'd seen that wasn't The Incredible Hulk. Him as a director, as an actor, it's a really interesting performance from him, but I just think everybody that's brought on board, there's chemistry. There's chemistry with the main trio. Whenever someone's with the other, vice versa, it always works. When the groups, they're together. When Ed Norton's with Meatloaf, it works. The fact that Meatloaf is in this film, I know he'd done a bit of acting in the past, but to take like a very famous singer like that, essentially say you've got testosterone cancer, you're going to be very feministic in this, and it's Meatloaf, which is hard to just contact the grasp of. It's him. I remember watching the film like, what? That's Meatloaf. It's really interesting who he's able to bring together, and you even look at some of the younger actors. Well, as much as I ridicule him a lot. You've got like a very young Jared Leto. I've forgotten the lad's name, who was in Band of Brothers and was up for he was almost Batman if it wasn't going to be Christian Bale. Owen Bailey, I can't remember if it's the Irish pronunciation, but you've got a lot of young actors in there too, in these sort of roles, and it's a really interesting cast and how it does come together and how it does sort of build on. And I just think with Fincher, there's that maturity angle to it where, because he knows the source material, he knows what he wants to do with the film. He strikes me as the director, and I know we're a few films in now, and it sounds really pathetic to say, oh, he might not be 100% into a film. Because we've done so many of these retrospectives, we've done films where there are directors who, I hate the phrase "their heart's not in it." I still don't fundamentally believe a director takes a project and doesn't give it his best.
Yeah, films that just clearly are not what they want to pitch, and they're doing the film,
or it didn't end up being the film they wanted it to be, and that's also very clear when you watch it in retrospect. And Fight Club's that sort of polar opposite where, again, I don't want to do an Alien 3 because that's unfair, because that wasn't his fault. It didn't end up that way. And it's too boring to jump on Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and put that's the glaring obvious Spielberg doesn't want to come back, but most people will. I'm not going to criticize the Dark Knight Rises, but I always still maintain that Dark Knight Rises was, I'll come back for a third Batman and end it all if you let me do Inception first, which we all know how that went. And there's a very definitive ending for that character. And I just think Fincher's never had that. But like some of the best directors, you look at the gaps in between his release dates. Like, okay, we're in the 90s, we're getting the 2-year gaps, which is fairly common still. I know Spielberg's dropping 2 films a year at this point, which is ridiculous and incredible. But Fincher's always, because he's a perfectionist, because he almost has that precision approach to what he's making, kind of like Nolan, it's always one film at a time, never juggling, never playing more. He'll make his film, then we won't hear from him until there's an announcement to be made about the next one. And I quite like that with directors. And I know people will think that should be by the book, but again, that doesn't happen these days. We have directors coming out saying, hey, I've just signed on to do a trilogy. And you're like, what? You haven't even made the first one yet, and you're talking about a trilogy that's been confirmed. And it happens a lot with a lot of other things. Or most recent example, before at Star Wars Celebration, I forgot the name of the Indiana Jones director who did Walk the Line.
James Mangold.
Yeah, James Mangold announced for a Star Wars film 2 months before Indiana Jones came out. The most horrendous example of mankind, Colin Trevorrow doing a Star Wars film because Jurassic World made money. Who would have thought a film about dinosaurs actually being in a theme park wouldn't make money? Given the first one,
I was going to say Dominion even made money, and you know I haven't seen Dominion, but I hear bad things about it.
Yeah,
it was interesting.
The lowest one. It's like the steady decline, the rise of Skywalker, if you will, of the Jurassic Park series. But trying to get back on track. I mean, could you imagine? Like, I don't want to see David Fincher do a franchise because we've seen it of Alien, but again, as a director, I'd imagine him if he did want to make a film one day. Did he almost do a sequel to World War Z? Was that him that was attached to that at one point? Then I remember the Brad Pitt film. There was. I don't know if it was Fincher. There was a big director attached to the sequel, and it just never happened. But again, if you've got the right director, you understand why they'd go into that approach. And I certainly think it's something to bring up with Finch, that his approach to these films. And again, I'm looking at this because of the directors they'd been through, who would have all been. I don't think Peter Jackson would have been bigger than Fincher at this point in the 90s, but the others all were. And it's very interesting that he's ended up with Fight Club. And now we're looking back at their careers, and you could argue he's had the best one after Peter Jackson of any of them. You could argue he's had a better career than Lord of the Rings, isn't it? So it's one of those. But let's talk the story. We've spoken about the office mentality. Me and you we spoke about this. We were chatting yesterday. We're pre-recording this, so this was recorded the day after our Ahsoka video. And I know you'd been watching this film across the week, and I was kind of not nervous to go back to it, but the story as a whole is really interesting. That even when I was younger and saw this, the radical terrorism side of things, not that I didn't care about it, but it never like gripped me. I was always more interested in the actual individual characters and what their story is and what their character arcs are. And I still think on repeat viewing, this film delivers with that. But it inherently was different because of what we spoke about, that in the last 10 years we've had those monotonal office jobs with the shit managers above them, with the big corporation companies, if anyone's worked under one of those. All these kinds of things. It made the story really interesting. Not that I'm some radicalist and wants to see, not that I want to see, what is it? They blow up all basically the credit companies. Not that I need that. Be curious, but yeah, I don't need it. It's one of them where I just think, not that I understand it more, because I understood it fine perfectly. I don't think it's too hard a concept to follow, but I just think the individual experience is tailored somewhat differently now because of that background, and it just made the first 2/3 of the film way more interesting than it used to be. And already I thought it was interesting before. But I guess it's this sort of Tayte you mentioned earlier, that because you've not had jobs like that or worked in those environments, etc., you haven't connected as much, which is completely normal too. I just was caught off guard by how much, maybe because I've had such a dreadful week at work. Him lying down on the sofa, everyone knows the gift, don't they? Just him drained, devoid of everything. So that's like, we all know what that's like now. So I'm in a really weird mind this, where I really still like the story, but I've never really been 100% sold on where it goes, but I understand if the purpose of the story is telling why this character wants to do that. Sorry if that doesn't make any sense.
No.
But that's...
So I've seen a lot of videos, blogs, various different things talking about films that came out in 1999. Because 1999 is famously one of those years that was just fantastic for films. I remember us possibly discussing doing a Battle of the Brackets back in the day, which was what was the best year for film. And I know that 1999 was going to be one of the top picks, one of the first ones going off the board. And the kind of style of the films that were coming out in 1999, and I know this was a book beforehand, and I know that all these films would have been in pre-production beforehand, but it's all escape from reality. It's all, are you tired of your bored, mundane life? Think The Matrix, think this film as the two biggest examples of that. You know, they're putting you in kind of a situation where it's like, look, the world is run by kind of simulations, or the world is run by the corporations. And this film looks to try and break the mold, for a bit of anarchy in. And it's just before the turn of the millennium, maybe in a time of unease. People were genuinely concerned about Y2K back then. So, you know, this film came at the time where a lot of people would have been bored with no guidance in their life. It's coming to the end of not only a decade, but a millennia. So people are looking for new beginnings. And I guess that's a springboard for various different things, whether that's acts of rebellion or acts of violence. And that's kind of come out in a lot of the films and TV shows that came out during this year. Especially when, and this is a post thing, looking back at it, this is before 9/11. This is before that changed things again and changed how people viewed various different situations again. Like, this film depicts domestic terrorism. I don't think this film would have, I think it would have hit very differently if it came out that year, later on in that year at least. So this film came out at almost the perfect time, kind of synced up with everything else, and it depicts the struggles that people would have been going through in that generation, which is sometimes called the slacker generation. You know, people sofa surfing, looking for jobs and stuff like that, or going through boring, mundane office jobs, wanting something a bit more adventurous, a bit more extreme, kind of whether they go out of their way and just kind of fantasize about going and having a better life, or whether they actually take the action on it. So the story is very much set in its time, but you're always going to have people who are looking to do more. And you're always going to have people who are struck with boredom. You're always going to have people who don't like their job. You're always going to have people who go through rough patches in their life where maybe they are sitting on a sofa at home and they want to throw a bit of anarchy in there. And a lot of people are protesting nowadays over various different things. And absolutely, you deserve the right to protest as long as you don't take it too far, of course. But it's always going to become relevant, and it's always going to be relevant because it lays down enough of the groundwork to be relevant for multiple different people. Like I said at the start, I've never had an office job, but I've been bored before, so I completely understand what the characters are going through. And that's just down to the story. That's completely down to the story. I don't think Fincher, I mean, the way he portrays it is great, but that's all set by the novel, and that's all just put onto film, which is, I guess, a wider medium, and people would view it, and it's become referenced in pop culture, and it's become popular through that, and therefore people understand it better and people see it more. So the story is relevant still, and I think it was also very relevant back then. And like you said, I'm absolutely fascinated for anyone commenting to say whether they saw it back then in the cinemas and tell us what the kind of experience and how it kind of related to you at the time as well, because I think that would be a fascinating study in itself.
Yeah, I think you're dead right about the timing for sure. Like, I've looked at films from 99, and also, of course, in my mind, and I think when it was brought up years ago, it was always, you know, it's pre 9/11. Like, you would not have this film made this way if it came out after 9/11. If it was 2002, 2003, absolutely not. There'd be no way it could be made as it was. And quite right.
Yeah, I'm just looking as well. I didn't even realize American Beauty came out that year. That's also about kind of boring, mundane lives, you know.
We did the video recently on the monthly stream, so I saw Office Space for the first time.
Yeah.
And I don't think the UK's ever had it, and then maybe this is one for American commenters. The whole office was where I think are wanted as well. They're all like, what do they call them? Like, not pods, but they're all
like
those horrible little
it's like cubicle partition.
Yeah, I don't know that's ever been a thing in the UK. It's certainly not at my one, and it wasn't at my old office. And I just thought it's a very American, or is it very 90s? But I think Office Space was the same year, or maybe a year before, a year after. And it is interesting that, I mean, I think a Y2K, not that I always go to wrestling, but, you know, you've got Chris Jericho, which people, you know. But it's one of those that, because we were all sort of too young, I need to be really careful how I say this. Not like things were bubbling, but there was this like uncertainty with the world. And that sounds really strange to say, but, you know, the whole Y2K bug, yeah, we can laugh at that now. But could you have imagined if they were so dumb to program computers to not work in 35 years' time? That would be ridiculous. And it clearly was never going to happen. But there's no coincidence that these kinds of films are all coming out in 99. As technology is pushing higher and higher. And we're in a similar situation now with a certain technology that's being pushed. 99 was more about just technology as a medium. Now it's about artificial intelligence in those technologies that were radically developing throughout the early 2000s into obviously the 10s and the 20s. But it is interesting with this how, again, Fincher has approached it. And story-wise, it couldn't be any different as well. It's not like, sorry to keep bringing up Nolan, but when we spoke about Oppenheimer, it's like his career is built to this. You can look at all these bits of his other films piecing together that points to him doing Oppenheimer. There's anything like Fight Club that Fincher's done at this point. Alien 3 couldn't be any more different from 7. From 7 and the Game are probably more aligned. But with Fight Club, and kind of what we spoke about last week, Tate, that Fincher knew that he couldn't get the final act of Fight Club. And the way he talks about himself as director, the way he does his films, you just know, following on from the Game, he was going to nail that film after his ending, irregardless. You could just assume on the spot that he'd probably have the ending done first and not work backwards, but the visualization of the ending. And when people look at the defining shots of this film, it is always the towers falling down, which, as you both very rightfully said, wouldn't be allowed to be done that a couple of years after. Probably wouldn't even be doing it today, if I'm being honest. Some directors might, but I'd be very surprised.
Yeah, and maybe not. And I think because it's kind of the average American male doing this as well, the majority of the group that is part of Fight Club are mostly kind of middle-aged white men. I think there would be a certain kind of, probably more of a backlash against that nowadays, that they're the cause of trying to bring down American infrastructure and trying to basically just cause chaos. And I bet there's a lot of people who would look at it and just go, this is attacking us, and it's, you know, it's not fair. When really it's more of a funny commentary than anything on kind of what could happen. Obviously, it's something like that, it would never happen. I think there's a lot of humor within the scenes with the actual Fight Club itself, but it does come from quite a deeper toxic masculinity place, which I suppose back then wouldn't be talked about more. I bet it'd be back then way more interesting. I think that's the reason for people who saw it originally in 99 to comment, because it'd be good to kind of hear, how much did they take from that? Was there anything else going on that might have that they thought, oh, I've spoken to people about this or not? Whereas nowadays, you look at something like this film and you go, oh God, well, ever since then, so much has happened, so much has developed, and there's so many kind of outlets now for men to talk and stuff. I actually feel like Edward Norton's character going to groups and stuff in the beginning is a really interesting thing for him to actively, you know, do something to kind of interact with people and to kind of get something out. And it just goes dead wrong with, let's just go to traditional male, we're going to beat each other up, and then suddenly that turns into terrorism. You know, it's so weird, but so interesting.
Yeah, and I think kind of in line with that, actually, that's a good segue. We want to talk about the characters, because the characters are what make this and do this. It's really hard to talk about the narrator and Tyler Durden separately because they are the same character, but I know people mentioned it earlier. Sorry, apologies, I think you might take, but the twists. You said that you think that had been spoiled before you'd seen it.
Yeah, I mentioned it off stream beforehand, but before the first time I watched Fight Club, I had this twist spoiled for me. It did kind of change the way I saw the film, because the first time I was watching the film, I was looking out for the little signs that would say, you know, that they are separate people, or they are the same people, basically. So because of that, I viewed every single interaction as kind of him talking to himself, and you do notice it pretty quickly. It's one of those kind of, once you know the spoiler, you are looking at and you're like, oh yeah, there's so many different opportunities where, you know, he speaks to certain doormen and they look directly at the narrator and not at, you know, Tyler Durden, and, you know, he always gets addressed to himself by everyone, and Tyler's never addressed at all in the film. So, you know, you can pick up on it very quickly and notice it pretty much straight away. But yeah, it did change my viewing experience. I don't know how it would have been if it was like first time. I don't know if my mind would have been blown or not, whether I would have figured it out or not, but it definitely made me be a little bit more alert and try and find the clues.
Sam, what about you?
Yeah, I honestly can't remember if I knew about it beforehand or not. I feel like Fight Club was being talked about anyway, regardless of studying it. So I feel like I may have heard of it, but I think going into it, I was less worried about that. And then I think when you are a bit into it, you kind of forget, at least the first time, from my perspective. But yeah, I think it's very clear on rewatch, like going into it again after so long and knowing anyway, you immediately look out for everything, and it's so obvious now. It's ridiculous to me how obvious it is. But it's also, you know, I feel like it's interesting that they didn't leave it till the very, very end. I feel like there's still like half an hour of the film or so, like when it gets revealed. And like in my mind, like I would have thought they could have left it until literally they're in the building and it's the gun, and then the gun reveal could have been the reveal. But I love that it is a little bit earlier, so you can have, you know, the narrator kind of find out all that stuff and kind of realize he's been doing it. But then I guess the other thing is imagining this film just from everyone else's perspective looking at him, because Brad Pitt's performance is just kind of, I guess, is the best kind of part of it for me, even though I think Edward Norton does fantastically well as well. But because Brad Pitt is just so loud in it, it's like there's like, whether that's to do with his clothing, with his performance, with his physicality, he just kind of steals the show. So it's hard to imagine Edward Norton's character doing all of what Brad Pitt's Tyler Durden does. But it's also something that I would love to see, and I like that we get those glimpses of it. But it's different. It's very different.
Yeah, I mean, if I go back to seeing it for the first time, I didn't have the faintest idea about the twist. So, and I think one of the reasons it works so well, the opening scene of the film, obviously after the credits, is the actual final scene, the gun in the mouth type thing. And then, like any film that does this, I keep jumping to Mission Impossible 3 still, because it technically is a fake out, so it's even more comparatively. But immediately your mind is hooked on the, okay, how do they get to this moment? How are they going to get to this part of the film where Brad Pitt's got a gun in the mouth of we obviously don't know who's called the narrator at that point, Ed Norton. And I remember when it got to the twist, I was like, wait, what? Like, because we were watching for the first time, you couldn't rewind and go backwards. So immediately I wanted to watch that film again. I'm pretty sure I watched it probably that weekend. And it's so... Obviously, once you know the twist, you can pick it up. But it's so well hidden if you don't know, because it's the really small intricacies. And I don't think it's something anyone could watch for the first time. Like, yeah, I saw this coming by a country mile away. It was never that obvious. You have to really, really dig deep into concentration. And especially for this one, we haven't mentioned it yet. When you're digging deep into concentration of this, do you want to know about the penis stuff? That's not so weird to say.
Sure.
So obviously, when they put the frame in the cinema, they do that I think 7 or 5 times in this film as well, where it's just really randomly done, and it's such a weird little detail. But going back to what I said, like the film is very funny, and at points you could think not comedy, but it should have, when you take the outcome and the story together, it shouldn't be a funny film, but it's actually very funny. And it gets funny as time goes by because now we get to Jared Leto get battered to a pulp on screen, which out of context is great in the year 2023. But it's just one of them with the characters that, because they're such polar opposites, again, you wouldn't really clock it. If they were similar, if they look similar, if they're the same charisma, same ego, you might think something. But again, when the twist is revealed, it works. Like Tyler Durden is the person, like, well, he wished he could be. It's a self-creation of himself. But they have to be the polar opposites to make that work. And I just think it is one of the best twists I've seen. And that's a mighty question to ask anyone what's the best twist they've seen in their life. There'll be so many you'd not say that there because there's so many, but Fight Club's one is right up there just because it's that story purpose alongside character purpose, and the fact you have a performance as good as Brad Pitt's in this. And believe me, he's unreal. And I wanted that red jacket for years. Could never pull it off. So obviously I never bought it. To know that that's not actually real at all and a figment of his imagination kind of makes that twist more shocking. That it's not like it's a conscience on the other side. It is this like cool guy that everyone wants to be. And that's who he's putting himself as, who he's presented as. And as you said, Tayte, once you're seeing how everyone acknowledges him, even how he's standing in rooms, if Brad Pitt's talking, the narrator is stood with the crowd on the other side, blending in because he's not there really. And it's just the way Fincher's approached the twist as well. It's almost like he has worked backwards off a good way, that sometimes you see some films and a really shit twist comes on board. And I think there's nothing worse than a terrible twist because most of the time it is done. Again, subjectivity is a word that's overused in this modern day. I would say post Last Jedi. Again, people entitled to their opinions, fine. But the concept of people getting mad about a film has an engineered twist, and this isn't The Last Jedi. A film has an engineered twist. The story is built to the twist. Knives Out's a great example. Sorry to bring up Rian Johnson. The second one, sorry, with Glass Onion, ironically, Ed Norton film too. The twist was that there's a twin sister. That's not sorry, I didn't say subjection. Subverting expectations was what I was meant to be moaning about. Glass Onion does it so well. And then people are like, oh, it's subverting expectations. There's no, it's a twist. There's two different things. Subverting expectations is when you have expectations and they're subverted, which films do, which can be very frustrating. And I get that. But some people now can't comprehend that a twist is a twist. That they can be. Sometimes a twist is subverting expectations. Sometimes it's not. And it's just, again, it's this modern outpour of media where, for example, a very, very well-renowned YouTuber who I cannot stand, who I always moan about, yesterday decided to say after the episode of Tayte, by the way, you update on Ahsoka. Spoiler alert for everyone at home who's not.
I'm up to date on Ahsoka, so you may go.
Great.
For it.
Someone said, I can't remember it word for word. Sam, it was like 4 seconds long, right? It's just like they should do a Clone Wars series.
Yeah, it's like, oh, they should do a Clone Wars. They should do they should do a Clone Wars series.
And I'm like, there's only been 7 seasons of it already, but apparently we need. It's like when people say we need an Anakin, we need a Darth Vader. So it's like, yeah, we have it. It's called the Saga. Well, episodes 1 to 6 now, I guess. So it's things like that where. Sorry, I'm going on this tangent, but I'm not a critic. I never like referring to myself as a critic. I can critique stuff. It's like if I play football on Sunday, it doesn't make me a footballer, does it? Far from it. So. It's one of them where people jump for how they look at texts. And I'm not saying that art of criticism is dead. It's far from it. It just now makes it harder to find the people that are competently able to project and discuss things. I'm not saying I'm that, by the way, just in case this is an ego trip. I'm really not. But I'm not saying I'm shit either, because I do know what I'm talking about to a point. But yeah, I'm going to pass on because I love both performances in this film. And that was a very elongated way of saying it.
Yeah, I was going to say round the bushes there, but so yeah, this film is absolutely sold by the two performances that is technically one, and it's the two sides of the coin thing. It's the two characters, which are actually one character being played by two actors trying to portray the same character in two different lights, and that is exactly what this is. I really like the fact that Ed Norton's character throughout the entire film does get a bit more brazen as we go along, and you start to see kind of bits of Tyler Durden seeping into him as almost as if the two characters are actually combining together. And I also like the fact that Tyler Durden's character does not change at all, and you can see that personality is starting to take over. And in certain waves of the film, you get more from one character than the other, but you never get the same character twice. It's just a fantastic way that they've been woven together, and they're brilliantly acted. I wouldn't be able to say which one was the better performance, because one is very subtle acting in one sense with Edward Norton, which he was known for before this film with Primal Fear, his ability to switch his characters over like a, which I personally think is a slightly better twist than this film, if we're putting it out there. But yeah, I think he definitely has a phenomenal acting range, and this film has shown that in multiple different ways. And same with Brad Pitt in this film as well. He plays such an enigmatic kind of character to be able to get you on board and get you kind of in with him. He's the guy you want to be friends with, and then suddenly he's the guy you don't want to be friends with, but you're already too far along the journey, and then you realize you are that guy. You've been drawn in, and you are that person. He completely sells it, and his character role in this film has become iconic, maybe out of the fact that the narrator doesn't really have a name in the film. I know he does get a character name later on in the film. I think his name is revealed, but everyone just refers to him as narrator. But everyone knows Tyler Durden. Everyone knows Tyler Durden because he's such a cool character, and he is holding the soap bar on the poster for the film. So people immediately go, "Oh, it's the Brad Pitt film. It's the film where Brad Pitt gets, half naked and fights, but it's not Snatch. It's the other one." So yeah, really, really good roles from both of them. I also want to give a shout out. I know we've got Helena Bonham Carter's character on here as well. She did a really, really good job in this role. And I know that you put out a really fun fact beforehand that Winona Ryder almost had that role, which I could see, I want to point out. But I do want to put out another two shout outs. One to Meatloaf, the late great, who, first time watching this, I was like, I recognize that person. He's the guy in Pick of Destiny, right? So that was who I immediately went for. And I think his character, Bob, for that kind of character whose masculinity has almost been stripped away, he plays that very well. And it does show that he was actually able to, actually do proper films, before, not just comedic roles and stuff like that. But also, I want to put out a shout out to the long-term partnership that Fincher built up with, I'm going to pronounce the name, Holt McCallany, who ended up being one of the lead roles in Mindhunter, which was one of his series way later down the line. And he had a decent role in this film as well. I'm glad that he's able to maintain relations with various different actors and be able to reuse them in various different roles in various different areas. And now you two are frantically searching up who that is.
Well, I know he's an alien, but I'm always trying to remember which actor it is that he's popped up.
Have you both watched Mindhunter, by the way?
I've not.
No, I want to, but I just can't justify watch. I'm not even watching films at the moment, which is really bad saying it on a film channel. I'm not watching old films presently. But I do want to watch Mindhunter because I have heard about it for years, and I know that it's about the serial killers, but the serial killers are literally cast to perfection, to the point that the Manson one was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as well, wasn't he? So it is something I'll probably end up watching once we finish this retrospective, because I try to avoid TV, and I really want to rewatch Peaky Blinders, but I just haven't restarted it yet. Sam, have you seen it?
I've not. No. It's not even on my radar. To be honest, there's a lot that I need to.
It should be on your radar.
If you're telling me to put it on the radar, I will put it on the radar. Tayte.
Put Mindhunter on the radar. Put Mindhunter on the radar.
I'm going to make sure that it's typed into my browser now, so I can remember to get back to it. But yeah, I was going to say about the main characters anyway. I think sometimes in films is the whole like false narrative route that they could go, and I love that. That's kind of here a bit, but I see it more as a skewered narrative where basically everything is happening, it is going along, it's just not quite as it seems. So everything is actually what's been said has been said, what's been done has been done. You see kind of later on the narrator just fighting on his own, and you see the clips dropping the beer and stuff, and I love that we see bits of that anyway. What I really appreciate about Edward Norton is that although he's not kind of your stereotypical film star, for a lot of his roles, that kind of physicality that he has as kind of not being that stereotype really works, and it works exceptionally well with this when you put him against someone like Brad Pitt, who is the stereotypical, you know, film star, and kind of that aspirational element that you want. And again, to kind of like mirror what Tayte said, you get these kind of two individuals who find each other and who kind of really lean on each other. Lots take positives, but then there comes a point where you've taken all the positives and now you are left with all the negatives, and it just goes further and further to the point to pass to a point that you don't even realize how you got there because it's just suddenly happened. But yeah, my favorite twist, and I do have kind of a definitive one. It's kind of been ruined a bit, but it is The Usual Suspects, which I had no idea what that twist was going to be until it happened, and
yeah,
absolutely loved it. And I
would agree as that being one of the best twists of all time.
Nothing's matched it ever since I saw that film for the first time. But yeah, but anyway, in terms of, yeah, I won't go too overboard with the performances of those two because I think they are excellent. They make the film. If they got one of them wrong, the film wouldn't have worked. And it's great. They have a great rapport throughout the entirety of it. So that's fantastic. Helena Bonham Carter, she's I sometimes think that she should be in it more than she is, but it's great to kind of have that person who's within the world, but she's also an outsider. She's very much kind of, you know, she's in when she needs to be. She has this relationship. I feel like that when she's in the film, it's way more obvious that Tyler Durden isn't there because they just never share the screen together properly. That just doesn't happen. So I like when she's kind of speaking to Edward Norton and is just kind of like really confused, and we as an audience at that point are not supposed to know why, but then it's so obvious in her conversations with him later. And she's hilarious in it. I think she's so funny in this. And I think Helena Bonham Carter as an actor is always able to kind of go to those places and kind of dig out the comedy within them in any character that she plays. I don't think there's been any performance I've seen her where I've not found her characters to be kind of at least somewhat funny, even if it's kind of a dark humor, if it's, you know, outright comedy or anything. So she was fantastic, and I kind of love kind of the ending that we get to her character and Edward Norton's at the end. I think it's weirdly sweet in the oddest way possible. And Meatloaf, bear in mind, I'd only seen him as an actor in the Rocky Horror Picture Show and Spice World, the movie. Two very different films and two very different roles, since then come to this. And you love the character. I feel like everyone loves Bob. I don't think there's anyone out there who can say, I really don't like Bob as a character. And I think Meatloaf just adds a certain thing to it. I feel so sorry for this guy now. I want to give him a hug. And so then when he's kind of the sacrificial lamb of this film, it's terrible. But then, you know, his name ends up having a meaning, and then, you know, that helps with kind of the narrator figure things out a little bit when he realizes that fight clubs across the country are also saying his name. And so I do like his purpose for the film. And yeah, Jared Leto's fine. I guess the main thing with him is that he was known as that pretty face in the 90s. I think he was in a TV show as like a teenager being that heartthrob. So then be kind of a heartthrob in this, to then get the
absolute
shit pummeled out of him, and to make him look, you know, disgusting, quote unquote. I feel like that's kind of like the subverting expectations of this film, is that, oh, Jared Leto's in it, he's going to be the pretty kind of like, not Brad Pitt pretty, but, you know, kind of the cuter guy, and he just gets, you know, that happens to him, and he doesn't really have much else bearing apart from being kind of the person who threatens the narrator, I guess, you know, because it looks like he's going to be Brad Pitt's right hand at one point, and it's like, nope, I'm going to take you out.
Great quote. I wanted to destroy something beautiful.
I know, I've got that written down actually, because I didn't realize how much that line in particular like really got to me. I was like, whoa, this guy's crazy a little bit.
I also have a fun fact, just looking up on Meatloaf now. There are reports out there that he helped edit the film.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
You know what? At least he didn't do a song for it, because you know sometimes some musicians that go into films do it and then do a song. Glad that the approach was to him as an actor rather than actually, you know, like I want to do a song, so get me a role. Looking at you, Madonna in Die Another Day. But I like that one theme.
Me too.
But we've mentioned music. Let's talk. I mean, this is such a weird soundtrack. I love this soundtrack. Right, it's done by the Dust Brothers. Haven't heard much from them. I don't know if they were like a 90s like DJ or whatnot, or whether they got rebranded. I know that Fincher's always known now for working with Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor. Trent Reznor? I can't remember. Sorry, someone's fuming somewhere. And I remember listening to it, and it's the IKEA song. And I actually quite like this. It's like that dreadful store music, but there's something else sinister happening. And I had this on the soundtrack before, like on my iPod when I was younger. I say younger, like not that young, obviously. And I remember always liking it. And there's a song which is basically just Tyler Durden doing the speech of like, "You are not the car you drive. You are not." It's a very good soundtrack, but the way it works in the film, I noticed it much more this time, probably because I'm listening to it on and off in the years in between seeing them. But I actually really rate the score. It's not a stereotypical film score. It's got a really wild approach, and I just quite respect that it's not easy on the ears. I don't have it on vinyl. I'm pretty sure it's been released on vinyl because I remember it was like an IKEA box type thing. But it perfectly accommodates what the message of the film is, what the film was trying to tell us about these people. And, you know, you have every time Tyler Durden pops up, it all starts getting weird, the soundtracks. And not weird, but, you know, the uplifting checkout music suddenly becomes sort of distorted and whatnot. And it's almost a sign of where Fincher's going to take his soundtracks for the coming years. I know Social Network is going to be the one that everyone speaks about for being his best soundtrack, but it's yeah, I don't have too much to say, but I've always had good, not vibes with it, that sounds ridiculous, but I've always appreciated it, and I think it stands out amongst other scores because I can't really think of too many like it. I don't know. Does that make me sound weird?
I have weird and interesting facts about these guys. As far as the soundtrack's concerned, it is definitely a vibe. It's definitely set for the film, and the first thing that immediately made me think of was this is very Chemical Brothers-y. Well, the Chemical Brothers originally used their name as part of a trademark as a homage to their group because the Dust Brothers are American, Chemical Brothers are English. They decided to go under the same name. And there was a massive kind of trademark lawsuit that went into place before the Chemical Brothers settled on their name, Chemical Brothers.
Is this like WWE and WWF? Like
yeah,
the music version.
Yeah. There was also a really weird thing. On the same year that they did the soundtrack for Fight Club, they also collaborated with a now kind of ish, starting to become more famous film director, James Samuel, director of Harder They Fall.
James Samuel has done a lot of
music and music videos and stuff like that.
Yeah, music. He works with Jay-Z quite a bit because I think Jay-Z's a producer on Harder They Fall.
So the Dust Brothers worked with James Samuel on the same year on the soundtrack to the film Muppets from Space.
Interesting.
That is. I've not seen that Muppets film, but
Muppets from Space, same year.
It's a great plug because James Samuel's new film is going to be at London Film Festival as well.
Exactly, and that was the connection. I was like, huh, okay. Wasn't expecting to see his name here underneath their Wikipedia article, but okay.
Sam, anything on the score?
Yeah, I don't have too much to add about it, to be honest. I think it's a score that I've actually, a lot of film scores I do listen to kind of, obviously outside of the film, but with Fight Clubs, I've never done so. And I don't know why that is, because it's definitely kind of really weird. Like, but for the score for this film in particular, my immediate reaction is weird, but everything fits. I think my first thought is actually there's two things. I think of Fight Club's music, and I think of the IKEA music, and I think of the last song by the Pixies, because I mean it's just so kind of synonymous with this film. And I've not listened to that song. I did used to listen to that song actually a lot back like 10 years ago, but I've not listened to it for a long time. So when getting to the end of the film, this last watch, I really felt something from it, and I think you know, the music for the whole thing is very good, and I do need to listen to it on its own. But I think having some of those kind of like heavier kind of like, you know, rock songs and using a bit more kind of electronic stuff also like helps. It definitely puts it in this late 90s time for sure. It's definitely, you know, not a soundtrack that I think could work. Well, I mean, it could nowadays. It could work nowadays, but yeah, I think it's just interesting. I like when it does fit with the narrator's own visuals, and like you said, when Tyler comes on, it just kind of, again, skewer. I feel like the word skewer is going to be on my word of this video today. But once Tyler comes along, it does just twist and skewer, and it goes a bit weird. But it works. It works for this kind of weird psychological, you know, thing that's going on with the narrator, whether it's kind of something like schizophrenia or some other form of personality disorder, along with his insomnia. I think having that as your main character can allow a musician or, you know, a composer the opportunity to do so much, and I think they utilize that really well. And matching that with the visuals that Fincher's bringing along, you know, makes for, you know, some really iconic scenes.
Definitely, and I'm glad you mentioned that end song, because that is one that is
everywhere.
It's still played everywhere, and it's still always think of Fight Club with it. And I know we haven't spoke about the opening credits. Actually, we do this not on the Fincher ones. The music when it opens, it's like that orchestral for 1 second, followed by then the electrical. It's the whole movement in the brain, everything. It is, again, for 1999, and I know that yes, The Matrix came out that year, as did The Phantom Menace, two of the best like visual effects years, probably two of the best films ever, probably for like that Oscar battle, whatever you want to call it. Fight Club visuals on that brain, that is like mega for 1999 to have a completely 3D animated sequence of going through the brain. I think it's about the nerve system, and it ends up obviously coming out. Can't remember, does it come out of the ear or through a hair at the end? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it is a hair. I do remember like hairs, you know, when it comes out. I mean, I got very, you know, X-Men opening titles where it's kind of like DNA and all that. That was kind of like my main like thought, and it could have been
before X-Men too.
To be fair, yeah.
And I just think it's a really, again, Fincher's always got these incredible not set pieces, but like opening titles that he approaches his films, and Fight Club's probably his most radical one so far. And again, it is that Y2K bug, the computers. That's how I always envision it. But the score on that I absolutely love, because it just gets you in the mood for the film. Like, it really pumps you up. But moving on from the score, let's talk about the legacy of this film. And you know, we're approaching its 25th anniversary next year, so we'll probably get a nice 4K box or something, because it's not been remastered, I don't think, at all. Love a cinema release. Would be very curious to see this at a cinema like Prince Charles.
Well, I'd love to see this at a cinema. This would be
I'd be very curious about a crowd, to see the crowd who'd go. Not that we react here in the UK, but I'd just be interested to see not the types of people. That sounds really rude, but yeah, I think this would be good for a little re-release.
Is it a broader audience, or is there a certain type of film goer that would watch this film in the cinema? Okay. I think that would be the interesting.
I don't think this is your Friday night Netflix only crowd. Do you know?
Speaking to every single person who's come onto this so far, it's just going to be people who study film in college. You know, it's literally just going to be.
It'd be good, but because the reason why is also intriguing. When this came out in '99, it grossed 101 million off a 65 mil budget. It's not a big hit, and it was mixed reception at the time, which again, it's easier for us to sit here and like. I mean, even we watched it, it wasn't. Sorry, I had a brain moment then. I was like, was I closer to, at the time of watching it, am I now closer to the release date? You know, that when you're in that weird predicament in films?
Yeah.
The gap from me watching it for the first time to its original release date, I was like, I really hope that isn't now closer than now, which it still isn't. Sorry, that was my brain just trying to figure something out. But there are a lot of films like this where I think we've been lucky in the year we've grown up with, that people like the reputations of these films have been restored. And I think we're slowly getting there with the late 90s, the late noughties / the early 10s and whatnot. Sorry, I thought I had a mega urgent message come through about a spoiler for something, but it's not. We're okay. I understand why this film has become a massive cult film. I understand, and I'll say this in a really peculiar way. As much as I was slagging off these segments and all that stuff, which is ridiculous, I do find it fascinating how everyone's interpretation of this film is probably going to be different. Again, we understand it based off this conversation with you both, not an arrogant, but how we've discussed the film, you know, the thematics, the story, the meaning, the characters. Some people do watch this film and like, yeah, I'd love to fight because, yeah, that's what we do. We're men. And it's horrible to say they don't get it because they clearly don't. But it's so intriguing at the same time. Like films like this can, again, I mentioned American Psycho. I don't know American Psycho as well, but one film I'm doing a very well, Drive, is another one. But like guys think they're Ryan Gosling in that film. Like, yes, I'd love to have that jacket too, but you inherently don't get the film if you think like I need to be the driver. That's not how that film goes. And it's just always interesting for me that we're presented with these, and not that I need Fincher to comment on it at all. You don't, but it is interesting that today, of all the films that tend to get this, they seem to be that late 90s, early noughties type films that when we were at school or college, we'd see these edgier films when we were like under the age of 18. And it's kind of like the generation before us not had their day with Terminator and stuff like that, but the films they were watching that came out when they were underage were things like Terminator, the 80s, the action films, whereas a lot of the stuff we were watching underage, I don't want to say is edgier films, but there was always sort of different meanings with it. And I think of, not to sound like an old fogey, but like today's kids, I'm not saying they're not challenged because there's certainly going to be films out there for them to do something similar with, but I'd certainly say that the films like this aren't made by big studios anymore, and it's harder to find the films like, not like Fight Club and not Sigma, so I'm not talking about Sigma, so I just want to clarify that, but the really testing films of thematics that are popular, you do not get the blend of both. You either tend to have independent film or it's a big blockbuster, so everyone's seen it. And someone, please comment me wrong, but it's just, I'm really curious about moving forward in the next 10, 15 years, what films people will be watching. Will they just be studying the same films that we all studied, you know, that everyone has? But I don't know. I'm waffling. I'm going to hand over because this film's legacy is very, very interesting and there's so much to read into it.
Nah, for films about toxic masculinity, they're going to be studying Barbie for decades from now on. That's going to take over Fight Club. You know it. We know it.
Yeah, you've nailed it. You've nailed it there.
We found the film.
Yeah. Barbie and Oppenheimer will both be studied.
Barbie and Oppenheimer are going to be studied.
That will be a film studies module. Yeah.
Do you know what I hate? People don't think that two films have ever come out on the same day before. So now every time there are two films scheduled,
Dark Knight and
social media is trying to make
it the same day.
Yeah, exactly. And it's happened a lot in the past. But
yeah,
I know Barbenheimer is different, but I'm getting bored of, and sorry to keep moaning about social media, but they're trying to make every film where there's two out on the same day a thing.
Yeah,
and it doesn't work like that.
This month we have
the circumstances of Barbenheimer.
I was going to say, this month we have Saw and Paw Patrol coming out. So we have Saw Patrol, obviously, is the next thing.
No, they moved Saw.
They moved Saw. We won't get.
Don't forget, we've got this Taylor Swift live concert, which people think is going to be like bigger than the Avengers, which keeps making me laugh.
Great, I don't care even slightly. I'm more excited.
It was really bad. I thought the tour was called Eras. I didn't realize it was meant to be Eras.
Yeah, it's Eras.
Yeah, that sums up how much I've been paying attention to Taylor Swift.
Anyway,
although if you do want to see a Taylor Swift film, she does get killed in Amsterdam that came out last year. She gets pushed under a car after about.
Oh my god, I've seen that on Twitter a lot. That clip, and I'm like, okay.
I don't know why I'm saying
it's a terrible Taylor Swift film. Cats is horrible. Don't watch that film.
Oh no.
Yeah, I reminded everyone that exists. Anyway, no. I think you're right. It's very difficult to have a film like this being made nowadays based on kind of not only the topic of what it's about, but also the content of the film itself. And I feel like deeper meaning films do get pushed to the independent market. And with most blockbusters, I'm not saying all blockbusters, but with most blockbusters, you're looking at very surface level things. And Barbie is definitely not your normal blockbuster. It definitely broke records and broke the mold and kind of broke what everyone expected from the film. What we were expecting from the films this year was superhero films once again doing big and, you know, having their surface level plots, but people just kind of watch them. Same with the Fast and Furious film. People just watch it. It's turn your mind off for the mindless violence. But in the end, we've ended up with a film that is slightly different. It has those kind of deeper meaning things. It talks about those topics. It does it in a very light-hearted way, and it does it as a comedy. But it's very difficult nowadays for a thriller to make good enough money and to be well recognized enough to actually kind of combat these different things and stuff like that. And B, you know, any film really being able to put out a deep enough message that people can understand it and view it in different ways. Once again, I feel like Barbie's only being viewed in various different ways because it's popular. Therefore, one crowd of it is going, oh, the film hates men and it's not letting men be men and stuff like that. The other crowd is going, hey, this is a critique on our society as a whole, and it's actually doing a really good job of it, showing both sides of it, you know. So that's how films are viewed nowadays and stuff like that. And Fight Club did a very good job of being the right film at the right time to be able to do this. And same with American Psycho as well, kind of plugging into similar themes and stuff like that. And yeah,
when we studied Fight Club, sorry to bring up boring film stuff, yeah. Sam, you probably had to look at the male gaze. Do you recognise?
Yeah. Yes.
That? Fight Club was the one because of Marla, because of, you know, the introductory scene of her smoking the cigarette in a super slow-mo, all that sort of stuff, and she looks amazing when she does
it. The CGI sex thing that
dream
kind of goes
thing,
on. Yeah.
And the male gaze as a concept's interesting because I spoke to someone that watched Barbie recently, and I was trying to not explain why guys dislike it, because I don't think guys do. Some do, naturally. I don't. I really like it, and all three of us do on this, but people don't understand the perspective of how the film industry has been, is that it has been a very male-centric perspective for the 100+ years it's been a thing. And until recently, we've had more female directors, female budgets, female producers, leading actresses. And I don't want to say films aren't made for you. That's not how they do them. But very much the concept of a film like Barbie, just getting to very briefly, because it could go on for tangents. People will talk about it. Barbie will be studied at schools. I guarantee that's going to be studied massively at like study level and whatnot. They're now getting the female gaze, which they can't comprehend. And I don't mean comprehend in terms of intelligence. You just haven't lived that experience as a female. I haven't. You two haven't. So it's interesting for me. My approach to Barbie, it was more interesting to see who I watched it with and her reaction to watching the film and what her experiences have been. The same way I've got two older sisters who I've also spoke about it with, because their emotional response and what they've been through, when they've been through just in terms of living perspectives, media, blah, 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 is completely different. And that's why it would have had, I mean, we could have had another guest on this episode tonight. It would have been very interesting to get a female experience on Fight Club 2, because that would be very different to, I mean, we've not sat here hyping it as like males, but we know that some guys wouldn't. It's very interesting when you get into the theories behind the industry. And I do think with a film like Barbie, some people just don't understand that it's a film that hasn't been made for them for once. And there's nothing wrong with that, because not to talk about like representation of women in cinema, we can do that chat. But Sam, you know Bond well. It's when people are, where's the good old days of Sean Connery's Bond? I was like, well, yes, in the year 2023, you're not going to have Bond slapping women in the face, are we? And people don't want to hear that. And I'm not critiquing the 60s by saying that. I'm just saying the societal norms are different in 2020s compared to the 60s. And it's not woke, it's reality.
But the thing is, with a lot of successful films, with a lot of films that kind of work for a broader audience, it's when a character, I kind of can get drawn to characters who I don't necessarily love and I wouldn't necessarily get on with as a person, but they're the lead characters they're presented to us. A character like Bond, for example, I love elements of that character. I don't want to be Bond, absolutely not. And there's certain things I wouldn't want. You know, he's not a perfect person. Same with the characters in this film; they are not perfect. Like there's elements of Brad Pitt, much like Edward Norton. I would love to have his wardrobe 100%. I would love to have his confidence, his kind of his charisma, but I don't want to do any of the other actions that he's doing.
Do you want to become a terrorist?
No, I really do not. So you know, I kind of want to be a little bit like Ken. in Barbie, but I also really don't. You know, I feel when anyone's so perfect, it just doesn't work as well for me. You need that vulnerability, and I think maybe that's part of why this works. I think a lot of people can see themselves within some of these characters, at least, anyway.
Yeah,
look,
100%, and
everyone gets bored sometimes, and everyone also wants a Mojo Dojo Casa house.
Exactly, and this is what I was saying, that Fight Club mainly today would be interesting because of how society has progressed to a point, but the modern perspective in a film like this, because the difference really is why we're doing this series. If you don't have David Fincher at the helm, we're getting you. Imagine Michael Bay's Fight Club. You know, imagine Christopher Nolan's Fight Club. Like
Project Mayhem would have been in the middle of the film, and then it just would have been.
It would have started with the buildings blowing up.
Oh my god!
It would be momentous. The film would be in reverse. But it's just it's one of those where the film theory stuff. I know it's not the right video for it, but Fight Club is probably one of the richest films we've covered on the channel in respect to themes. And I think going back to what we all said, everyone that's been on this channel spoke about studying it. There is a reason why they always study Fight Club. On top of it, you've got an auteur. You can do auteur theory. And for all your aspiring teachers out there, you're trying to pick films and modules to do.
The consumerism themes are insane with this film. Like, I did a lot about that anyway back then, but seeing it even now with more of kind of an insight into kind of daily normal life of buying things and stuff, it's actually insane how much
you are not the car you drive. How many people do we all know? You are not the car. Was it? You are not your khakis. I actually don't know what khakis means. Is that American? I thought it was like a weird like Canadian pronunciation.
Yeah, it's like
and it's the whole wipe down and the big corp stuff. Like, you know, we have to weigh the numerical cost that we'll do a product recall if it works out cheaper for us than to actually save lives. That shit's real. And there's an amazing line, about when they go into space, it'll be the big corporations naming the space stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, because we had, you know, Virgin doing space travel, which has already been there, done that. Amazon have done space travel. Elon Musk, not really a brand, but a dickhead, he's done space travel. And a lot of this stuff has happened. And again, it's really interesting they've been able to do this. And that's a very side piece tangent, but that's just us talking about how this is perceived today and how you couldn't have had those discussions 25 years ago. And that's why this film is aging perfectly, because it's not aged, it's not finished. As things progress, this film is always going to age in a different way to other films do. And this is why it stands out and people are still talking about it 20 plus years later. Whether they understand it or not, whether they've got different interpretations or not, there's so much to take into account. And we're like scratching the surface of probably what you can look into with Fight Club. But that being said, to get things back on track, because I know we're running near the end and we're running over. Everyone, do you have a favourite scene? And then it's really hard to pick one.
I will go with and it's not because Jared Leto gets beaten up, it's the line afterwards. That definitely impacted me, you know, after the film and made me think back and go, wow, that's just really, really, that just kind of puts the film into perspective, kind of right there. So I know the obvious pick is going for the ending scene with the buildings blowing up, but actually I really do like kind of the silence after, you know, he says, you know, I want to destroy something beautiful. That's just like, oof.
I really appreciate any scene that has, you know, real fourth wall breaking. And so the IKEA scene in his condo, and then also kind of the introduction to Tyler with the cinema, with him being a projectionist and then him being a waiter. I think the whole thing is just so funny, and it completely reshifts the film's tone, and I absolutely just adore it. And I'm not just saying that as a gay man who's like, oh, there's a random penis in the film reel, but also but I think it's just such a
the
funny...
parents looking at the kids and the crying, the one crying
that's
after.
so funny. Like, I think the first time I saw the film, to see the look at each other and then see the kid crying because of it was just, for 17-year-olds, the most hilarious thing that you could see. But
and
still,
they're doing that on the viewer. They're doing that on us too in this same film, which is just outrageous.
Yeah, and you get that one last shot at the end as well. That final one, it's like, oh, you got us again. But no, that whole stuff's really funny, and I love it. And I think the final bit when, well, not the final bit of the film, but when there's that bit where Tyler's looking to camera, and then you have a camera shake, and you see the film reel moving in and out, and I just think those stylistic choices were just kind of, they didn't need to be there, but it makes the film so much fuller to have them.
Yeah, and it'd be great to see that bit in a cinema as well. Actually, now you've actually pinpointed that. It'd be really cool. Final thoughts for me. It's always tricky to do final thoughts when we've spoke positively about a film for sort of 95 minutes, and I've sort of said at the beginning, this is up there with the 7 for me for the Fincher stuff. So you kind of know it's on a pedestal for me. But I would kind of say the final thoughts on respect of rewatching it for the series was very interesting. Maybe not so much the David Fincher side of it for once, because again, I know what we're going to get. I know we're going to get a quality film in terms of precision, the direction, the editing, the ingredients that put together a film, the craft. You can never really fault it too much of this. It was more the intrigue was based on what's happened in life in the last 10 years to change the approach of this film. Yet I still have the same feelings about that film after. It is just, I feel like this is one of those films that every time you watch it, you'll pick up new things. And certainly it was very different this time, and I'll be curious to see it again. As I said, I'd love the re-release next year, or a 4K re-release, remaster, something, because that will give me a good reason to go see it soon. But yeah, it's very exciting. And kind of now we know the next one's going to be something I've not seen, it kind of makes me a little bit excited to know what is coming next.
Yeah, this is, and it's regarded as one of the greatest films of all time in a lot of people's lists. I couldn't say the same for my own list, but I can definitely respect the film, and I do respect this film. It is a fantastic film. It's my second time watching it, and yeah, it didn't go down in my books. It kind of went a little bit up in my books, actually, for kind of how I viewed it and how I saw it, and, you know, how I'm analyzing it and looking at it. I really enjoyed just everything about it, the character work, the story itself. You know, it comes together. It's a complete film, and it is just as relevant now as it was back then, which is nice to see from a film, films that have longevity and films that you're able to watch in different lights every single time you see it. I can't wait to wait another 10 years and view it from the perspective of someone slightly older once again, and see if that has changed again in any sense. But fantastic film. Still not Fincher's best. We haven't got to that yet. We will be coming up to that reasonably soon. A little bit in distance still, but we'll get there.
Yeah, and I echo all of that. I think it's a fantastic film. It's not one of my all-time favorites, but, you know, objectively, I think it's such a well-crafted film. And, you know, I think my favorite thing about the film overall is the script. I absolutely love this script so much. There's so many lines that I wrote down this time. Like, our Great Depression is our lives is something that I think is way more relatable now than ever before. It's just, you know, I think it's so on point to what, you know, the characters are. And I think the script brings this film to life way more than anything else. But all the other things are done so well also, that it just means that the whole film just goes up a level. And so, yeah, I don't think there's any major weak links to this at all. I would definitely recommend it to anyone if they've not seen it before. I guess anyone who's watching this has either seen it or they've just had a lot of it spoiled. But I would definitely recommend it. It's an excellent one. And if you've not seen it for ages, again, I think it's one of those where have another try. You know, I feel like this is a film that at different ages you're going to have different responses to it. Some things are going to stick out more, some things aren't. But George, is like you said, I think there's something new to be found in it every single time.
Absolutely, and that's a great way to end that. So thank you, Sam, and thank you for coming on. As always, great to get you on, not just Star Wars stuff, but film stuff as well. Obviously, without plugging, we're doing Ahsoka reviews every Wednesday, so we've had a few different people on so far. Last week, we had the big Part 5 discussion, which was amazing to do, and we had to go early because of how long it was going to be. But sticking with David Fincher Retrospective, we are going to be back next week with Panic Room. Again, one of the films I've not seen, but jumping on the board, we have The Social Network finally. There's the next 4 weeks. We'll be running this through to the 13th of November, so there'll be a new Fincher film every single Monday. And alongside this, we've asked a lot in this video, more than we normally do. We want to hear people's comments because this film is definitely one that's going to bring up debate, bring up discussion, and everyone's going to read this differently. And maybe they were listening to us talking about film theory at the end and thinking, what on earth are they on about? This makes you want to read into that sort of stuff. Have a read because it is quite interesting. There are so many great essays you'll be able to find on Fight Club. Probably loads of great articles at the same time as well. They probably pop up every couple of years for every 5-year anniversary of some kind. So do check out all of them. Let us know your thoughts. Do hit the subscribe button. We'll be back, as we mentioned, next Monday with Panic Room. We're building up to the film festival. There's a lot of new releases coming out as well. We'll be covering them at the events. Obviously, everyone is still on strike, rightfully so. There's not been as many new releases, and there's not been the urge to cover them as well. I'm not going to lie. That's why there's been no new reviews since Oppenheimer, which is also really bad to say, I guess, on the film channel. But you can find us on social media, because if we do have films, there is a very, very good film we're looking forward to seeing coming out next week, directed by Gareth Edwards, the creator. That is out Thursday the 28th in the United Kingdom. So we will have reviews for that. And that is an original film that I do hope a lot of people do go out and see, because we need more original films. Everyone that moans saying there's no original films, go and support one. And then you might get another. So, yes, don't really know how to outro aside from that. Thank you both, as always, for coming on. Thank you, everyone at home who's been watching, who's been following this. We will be back next Monday. And in the meantime, take care, and we'll see you then.